Welcome everyone, especially also everyone in the US who is now watching via our live stream. Welcome to our EvidenceCon, the last part of our digital medicine conference today. We talked a lot during the last yesterday and today about digital health tools like DiGA and digital therapeutics and things, but we didn't focus so far on one point that is actually super important and everyone knows about it, but it's also like a tricky topic, so sometimes it's hard to talk about it. And we want to do that today. We have done that in like smaller circles already. We worked a lot on this topic, and today is the day when we want to bring the whole issue to the public and talk about how to proceed with it. And I'm talking, of course, about evidence, as the name EvidenceCon already says. I'm Benedikt Brönneke. I'm a lawyer and economist by training. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not an epidemiologist or anything. So I'm kind of like a sideshow Bob actually today. So the most important people are my guests that are invited today that you can find on this slide, and you might also have the program or find it online. I don't want to lose much time on it. But one thing before we start, this whole EvidenceCon now has two parts. The first part is about evidence for digital. Whether we're talking about a DiGA, like a digital therapeutic or whatever, or whether we are talking about a novel product that has to be or is to be used in a hospital setting, we most always, in nearly all healthcare systems all around the world, we need some form of evidence. We have to show that it has some benefit, mostly to the patients, to the care, measured in better outcomes, healthcare outcomes, sometimes also in structures and procedures that are getting improved. We're thinking about an electronic health record. For nearly everything, we do need or we should need evidence. And that is what we're talking about in the first part of our EvidenceCon today. The second part will be about the role that digital tools play in the generation of evidence. Because it's not only that we need new forms of evidence for digital, but it's also that digital has an impact on the generation of evidence. With digital tools, we can now generate evidence. We just talked about, or Jens Spahn just talked about real-world evidence. We can generate data that can be used as forms of evidence through digital devices. And that's the second part of our EvidenceCon, and there we will especially focus on something, a topic, a specific kind of evidence, and this is the patient-reported outcomes that can be measured, should be measured, and we will talk about how it can be done. So, and in the very end, we will have like a short wrap-up, and if we have time, we will have Q&As as well for every talk. But before we come to this second part, first let's talk about evidence for digital. You all know, and Jens Spahn and Jörg Debertin also talked about it just now, we will dissolve, the Health Innovation Hub will dissolve. So our project Evidence for Digital, Digital for Evidence will end with us in a way, but of course it's a super important topic and we want it to continue. And that's why we will hand over the whole project and this conference and the roundtables that we did so far to two organizations that will now be introduced by their heads, so to say, and that is the US-American DIME, the Digital Medicine Society, represented today by Jen Goldsack, the CEO, and DGDM, the Deutsche Gesellschaft für digitale Medizin, which is represented by Filippo Martino, the chairman. And for now, first, I say welcome to Jen. Hi, Jen. It's good to see you again. I have to say we had quite some events already, and they were super much fun. And yeah, Jen is kind of like an associated member of the Health Innovation Hub by now. I think we should send you one of our red hoodies. So Jen is CEO of DIME, and I just, like a couple of days ago, when I read through your LinkedIn profile, I saw that you have a master's in sociology and history of science, technology, and medicine. And I find it very cool because now I understand how you can write history of medicine and technology so nicely, because you know so much about the history of these two topics. So Jen, welcome very much to Berlin. The stage is yours. You will say something about the Digital Medicine Society and what you're doing.
Yeah, and I absolutely will. And thank you so much for including me today. It is fantastic to be part of this celebration of all the phenomenal achievements of HIH. You, Henrik, Julia, Ariel have been valued and powerful partners. We've done great work together. I'll highlight some of that today and really look forward to continuing in the sort of spirit of collaboration, of evidence generation, and of sort of thoughtful strategic approaches that you sort of really set the bar on through HIH. So again, thank you so much for including me today. I hope everyone can see my slides here on the screen. What we'll do today is spend a couple of minutes really introducing you to our organization, the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME, and talking specifically about why organizations like ours are so important as we think about intentionally building a future of healthcare in the digital era. So first, for folks who don't know us, our mission or our purpose, DIME exists to advance the safe, effective, ethical, and equitable use of digital technologies to optimize human health. We're still quite a new organization, founded only in 2019, though I would argue that sort of the timing of our launch and the intentionality of our entire organization to really serve the field as we digitize healthcare has allowed us to have outsized impact. We define ourselves as an organization that really sits at the intersection of these two communities. The healthcare community that for its entire existence has been dedicated to sort of improving the lives of patients, the technology community and all they bring to the table in terms of their innovation, their tenacity and their commitment to doing or delivering solutions, if not today, then certainly tomorrow. If we can cherry pick the very best of the commitment to patients and the commitment to robust evidence that our clinical colleagues bring, if we can bring the spirit of innovation that exists within the tech world, and instead of trying to keep them apart, we bring them together, we have enormous opportunity to really innovate in the field of healthcare. And I think it's important that we don't just think about digital health as being sort of the clinical community and the tech community. At DIME, we consider digital health and digital innovation in healthcare to be the most interdisciplinary field we can think of, from citizen scientists and cybersecurity experts to engineers, ethicists, data scientists, clinical care providers, healthcare executives, policymakers, regulators, payers, funders, investors, unless we all have a shared idea of what good looks like, unless we are all driving towards the finish line, the same finish line, unless we are all speaking and communicating and collaborating in a common unifying language that describes our field, we are not going to achieve the promise of the digitization of healthcare. And worse, we risk potentially increasing new inefficiencies, perhaps worsening disparities instead of improving them, and maybe getting it wrong as we strive for precision medicine, perhaps risking a surveillance economy. We have to be standing together. And when we look at the leadership of the Digital Medicine Society, we can really see this interdisciplinary approach is at every level of our organization, from the leadership all the way through to our membership. And I'm very proud that we boast thousands of members from across the different disciplines I've described, from around the globe, who contribute to our mission of advancing the safe, effective, ethical, and equitable use of digital technologies to improve lives. And one more piece about DIME, and then we'll dive in and talk about some of the topics that are so important for us to consider vis-a-vis evidence and vis-a-vis intentionally building a future of digital health. As we think about teasing out the best elements of sort of tech innovation and clinical sort of quality, our commitment is to deliver clinical quality work on a tech timeline. And I think this is really important. It is not dichotomous to think about we can either do high quality evidence-based innovation or we can move quickly. It is not an either or trade-off. If we work together, if we are intentional, and if we are focused, we can do both. We can deliver as a field clinical quality work on a tech timeline for the patients that we are all here to serve. So that's a little bit about the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME. Let me tell you about why we are so excited about sort of how we can transform healthcare in the digital era. We truly believe that there is a future that is possible where we define a successful healthcare system not by how good we are at intervening once an individual or a patient is sick, but we could redefine the entire healthcare enterprise in order to think about good healthcare as being the kind of care and the kind of society that focuses on prevention, that focuses on keeping people and patients out of the clinic, that focuses on wellness. And only when it is necessary, with every preventative measure having been taken, do we think about providing sort of interventional care. And I think this is really important. And why is this possible? Why is this possible in the digital era of care? I would argue it all comes down to high quality data. Data doesn't live in a manila folder locked in a filing cabinet in the investigator's office or in your doctor's office any longer. With the appropriate permissions, data can be liquid and it can flow from sort of from the patient's home into a variety of different sort of safe and secure places where a variety of different experts, from researchers to public health experts to sort of clinical care professionals, can access that information and make better decisions faster about improving individuals' healthcare, about improving population health, and even, as was mentioned in some of the remarks, really starting to think about better preparedness for future pandemics. All of this is possible not just because of the liquidity of the data, but in the digital era of health, we have access to incredibly high resolution information. Previously, healthcare decisions, whether they be about public health, whether they be about individual healthcare decisions, or whether they be in research, have depended on these tiny little snapshots of data captured inside the walls of the clinic. Now, with sensors and the other digital exhaust that we generate all day, every day, there's an enormous wealth of information that if we take an evidence-based approach, if we take a patient-centric, a secure and a sort of an approach that respects data rights, we can harness this information to really transform how we define health and disease in the digital era, how we reach patients, where we provide care, and how we even define that care. And I want to talk more specifically, and it was terrific. In some of the opening comments this morning, the questions to the minister were about, how are we going to start to see these digital tools and technologies play out in medical product development? Well, let me tell you the state of the field. Here at the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME, we maintain a crowdsourced library of digital endpoints currently being used in medical product development around the world. Let me be clear. These are not pilot studies. These are not feasibility studies. These are not proof of concept studies. These are not exploratory studies. All of these endpoints are being used by medical product developers in order to answer questions about the safety and efficacy of new investigational medical products. So let's look at the data. Currently, there are 225 endpoints being used, many of them decision endpoints, primary or secondary endpoints. Well over half of them in drug trials are being used in phase 2 and phase 3 studies, and 69 sponsors are currently using these in medical product development. This is an enormous achievement of the field and a really important bellwether that we are seeing an advancement in the science and an advancement in the trust in these tools. And importantly, I believe, a change in culture in the pharmaceutical and medical product development industry to begin to embrace these tools. And what's interesting, let me give you some context before we move on. When we launched this library in October of 2019, now we have 225 unique endpoints. At the time, we had 34. Now we have 69 sponsors around the world using these digital endpoints. When we launched, there were 12. In 2 years, there has been enormous growth in this field, but one thing does concern me. all 225 of these endpoints are unique. We have yet to see a single statistical endpoint that is the same in this library. There is not a coordinated, focused approach to developing these digital drug development tools or these digital measures of health. And that to me is a red flag. So I'm excited to share a project that we announced just yesterday. So this is breaking news in partnership with our colleagues at AbbVie, at Janssen, at Novartis, at Pfizer and UCB. DiGA is delighted to host the first pre-competitive collaborative to develop a digital endpoint for use in drug development in the pre-competitive space. Our focus is on digital measures of nocturnal scratch for patients with atopic dermatitis. And this is incredibly exciting, not only for patients with atopic dermatitis that these 5 companies are here to serve with their product development pipeline, but it's also important. We are very enthusiastic and feel strongly that this marks a turning point in the field of digital endpoints in medical product development. This is the first time that organizations have realized that we can do more, we can do it better, we can do it in a more patient-centric way when we come together. And our goal at DiGA is not only to develop these digital measures of atopic dermatitis, but also to draft the blueprint of what good, patient-focused, evidence-based, sort of aggressive timeline development of digital endpoints looks like. We are committed to completing this project within 9 months. Despite an enormous amount of research sort of being underway, we are confident we can do this. And we are confident that once this is complete, we can sort of take this blueprint and we can target other high unmet areas of need. We're looking ahead to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. We're looking ahead to thinking about core measure sets in physical activity, in sleep, in mobility. We believe we can transform this field and we can do it better by doing it together. And I think this reflects some of the values of HIH, something that we've learned from our colleagues at HIH, that we are better when we collaborate and we are better when we take an evidence-based approach. I'll spend a couple more minutes before I hand back to my colleagues just talking about a few of the other challenges that we are pursuing at DiGA. So first of all, as we observe a monumental shift towards remote patient monitoring, we have blind spots in the evidence available. At DiGA, we recently published a systematic review of academic research into digital measures. We saw phenomenal work that was thinking about thoughtful patient-centric measure identification. We saw work going into verification, analytical validation, clinical validation, the DiGA V3 framework that's really thinking about ensuring measures are fit for purpose. We could see thoughtful work around usability and utility, operations research. We saw an alarming gap. There was not a single paper published on ethics. There was no research into data rights and governance vis-a-vis digital clinical measures. There was but one publication on security. This leaves an enormous blind spot and high risk to both patients and the promise of digital innovation in healthcare. And the point that I would like to make and what we take really seriously at DiGA is we are responsible for this. We have a juncture in the history of the digitization of healthcare to get this right. We have an opportunity to do nothing other than benefit patients, to increase efficiency, to make care more patient-centric, to improve quality of care, accessibility, equity. But we need to make sure we are offering secure solutions, that we are thinking about data rights, that we are thinking about ethics, and we are avoiding harms. At DiGA, one of the initiatives we have on deck in order to address this is our Data CC collaborative community. Collaborative communities are an FDA and specifically CDRH priority, and we are proud to host the Digital Health Measurement Collaborative Community with our FDA colleagues. And we have over 40 participating organizations who are leading the field and are committed to our vision of realizing the promise of digital health measurement for everyone. There's a couple of other statistics that I think might be interesting for our evidence sort of conversation before I hand over to my colleagues, and I hope this will set us up for some great conversations today. In the US, during the pandemic, we saw a 1,200% increase in the use of telehealth, yet only 11% of encounters used any kind of remote patient monitoring. I certainly don't think this number should be 100%, But the tools are mature and there is evidence. And I think a lot of the challenges around better facilitating industry healthcare collaborations and better thinking about the redesign of clinical workflows so that we aren't burdening our clinical teams and we aren't just shoehorning these technologies into existing sort of care paradigms. We really need to think about reimagining care. At DIME, we're trying to address this problem through our partnership with the Veterans Health Administration. The VHA cares currently for 9 million veterans across the US. It is the US's largest integrated healthcare system. And that's where we're doing the work in traditional healthcare delivery settings. We also have our impact initiative dedicated to the advancement of virtual first care initiatives. What's virtual first care? It's care that isn't built around the clinic, expecting the patient to come to us. It's care that takes a variety of sort of digital tools that are now available in the toolbox and builds care around the patient, whether that's communications technologies, remote patient monitoring, whether it's digital therapeutics, whether it's bringing sort of mobile physicians to the patient's home, whether it's thinking about the use of sort of local imaging facilities, really thinking about a reimagined sort of era of healthcare built around the patient. 3 more initiatives I'll share before I hand back. The first is the challenge of taking all of this to scale. We've seen successful initiatives in both healthcare and research in the pilot phase. We are hamstrung by taking this to scale, and a lot of this is around the flows of data. I started my presentation talking about the importance of data as a currency in the digital era of health. We are working on a sensor data integrations tour of duty with partners from across industry in order to think about how we can deliver sensor data that is accessible, that is trustworthy, that is relevant, so we can make better decisions faster. We take inclusion incredibly seriously, not just of the patients we're all here to serve, but inclusion within the digital health workforce, really making sure that the digital health workforce reflects the patients that we're all here to serve. We have education and skill building initiatives for the entire global field underway, and we'll be delighted to talk about those initiatives with anyone who may be interested. And with that, Jan, let me hand back to you, and let me thank you again for your leadership and your partnership, and congratulations to you and the whole HIH team on what you've achieved.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jen. I'm always amazed about how much information you can put in so little time. It's really amazing. I mean, maybe it's because you're a native speaker, but I think it's also because you really have like a very clear idea here about what you're saying and where you're aiming at. So next speaker today is Filippo Martino. He's the CEO or chairman and founder of DGDM, the Deutsche Gesellschaft für digitale Medizin, and he will tell us a little bit about DGDM now. There's something that some of you might know about Filippo, but some might not know. He was heavily involved in defining the DiGA fast track. He was not as much in the spotlight as I am right now, and he's right now, but he was like somewhere in the background working on the DiGA fast track, possibly as much as I was. So I really thank you for that as well. That was in his times when he was working for FBeta. And before he will say something now, I also have to talk about 2 other people that are working in the background. Normally they are not, but today they are not visible here because they are at home taking care of their newborn babies. And that are my dear colleagues, Julia and Ariel, who are actually the masterminds behind this whole event. I'm just like, as I said, I'm just the sideshow Bob, not only for my speakers, but also for them, because they are at home, I'm here in their place. And just in case, I hope they are watching and having some fun here. And just in case they are watching, I would ask you to give them like a huge applause, because they are really like responsible for this whole EvidenceCon. Thank you very much, also Ariel and Julia, and greetings to your kids. So, but now, Filippo, the stage is yours. Please tell us a little bit. I think there should be, right, about DGDM.
Thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm very happy and we are honored to be here. So as you will see, the DGDM is a quite new and young medical association. And I will guide you a little through the story, how we ended up thinking, okay, that's the right thing to do now, to found the DGDM and to push the topics forward. So, as you all know, digital medicine offers us many opportunities, but on the other hand, also challenges in the future. And these challenges we are facing in the future are in a lot of different fields, such as technological, so we're talking about AI and ambient-assisted living, algorithms defining what clinical decision is right, what clinical decision is wrong, but there are a lot of challenges and also opportunities in this field. On the other hand, and this is something that you already mentioned, there are a lot of regulatory challenges we have to face. So the last 2 or 3 years now with the Ministry of Health was extremely active and very agile in the field of regulatory things. So we have the digital health applications, which are new and unique for the world. So yesterday there was a lot of new insights in these kind of topics, and a lot of other countries were interested in this kind of field. So there are a lot of challenges also transferring these kind of frameworks into a European harmonized standard. And these are challenges we need to face within the next few years, months and years. Also scientifically, and this is something I will talk about in the next slide, also scientifically, and these are two different perspectives. One perspective is what digital health can do for the scientific and for the scientific research. And on the other hand, how digital health applications, for example, need to be evaluated scientifically. This is a challenge I will point out in the next slide. Also from the medical part, clinical decision systems, and also from the ethical and social part. Is it right, and is this ethically right to say a patient with dementia, for example, is treated by a robot which is a seal? These are discussions we need to discuss in the future to see where we want to go with digital medicine in the future. And as I said, scientifically, especially the scientific evaluation and of digital concepts is challenging. For example, in the past we saw a lot of medicinal products and drugs and also analog medical devices. And what we're doing now is, we talked about this in the past, we do mostly randomized controlled trials for 2 to 3 years. Also 1 year is possible, but it's quite short. And we get a result. Is the drug working? How much is the lowering of the blood pressure, for example? Of course, it's not that easy, we all know that, but in general, it's, let's say, very determined how the randomized control study is performed at this point and how we get evaluation at this point. What is the case with digital concepts and medical products in this field? And this is different because what happens if you put digital concepts and digital products into these kind of study types? The product changes. And this is one of the biggest strengths we have in digital products. They can adapt to situations such as patient feedback or even, and we have seen this in the last 2 years, external factors such as a pandemic situation we had. So the digital products have the great strength to change over time. But this is very challenging because it's very difficult to put a digital product into randomized controlled trials, and it's not the same product as it has been 2 years ago. So what we need to face and evaluate for us in the future is how about alternative, more modern study designs we need to face, for example, adaptive study designs. And also, we talked about this already, real-world evidence. And these are the topics we need to face, we need to discuss, and we need to evaluate for us in the future to bring digital medicine and science together and to use the opportunity and the chances that digital medicine brings for us. So that is the background why we said, okay, what kind of medical association is taking care of that and is looking for this? And this was the whole background why we decided, okay, let's do this, let's found the association, and let's be the motor of these kind of topics. So as I said, we are quite a young medical association. So we were founded at the 11th of November, so it's our first birthday in the next few days. And as it is, it took us a while. It's not very fun in a situation, pandemic situation like this, to get the status as a non-profit association. So it took us a while to get the status until this year, May, to get this kind of recognition. And we're all doing voluntarily work in this. So, but who is member and who is working with us? So what we did on purpose is that in comparison to some other scientific medical societies is that we decided that digital medicine is a topic that needs to have several perspectives. And it's not just the perspective of a physician, not just the perspective of a nurse. It's a perspective from multiple sides, from multiple professions, and that's why we decided to open this society for physicians, for dentists, for pharmacists, scientists, nurses, of non-physician health professions, medical students of that kind, and also trainees. And this was on purpose because we think that digital medicine needs an interprofessional and interdisciplinary view on these kind of topics. And our mission is, and our purpose is, the promotion of science, education, research, and practical activities in this field of digital medicine. So what are our goals? It's the active support of medical professions in dealing with digital medicine. If you look at the studies, why doctors don't want to or are not able to prescribe, for example, digital health applications, they're talking about evidence, they're talking about data protection, but they're also talking about they're not well informed enough to being able to have a critical view on these kind of digital health applications. And this is something that needs to be changed. We need to inform the medical professions about the thing to enable them to make decisions for their own, to say, okay, this is a digital health application I want to prescribe or not. So this is a very crucial point we're standing and facing right now in digital medicine in Germany. Second point is, of course, development of guidelines and standards in digital medicine in working groups. So we are now establishing groups for the digital health applications as well as telemedicine to work on guidelines and standards we think need to be established here in Germany and also in cooperation with other countries, for example, also talking to DIME. On the other hand, and I will talk about this later, we also will, or we do this right now, the announcement of scientific prizes and scholarships to promote young talents in digital medicine. Furthermore, we actively support and anchoring the digital medicine in education because we need to train our future nurses, future doctors to know how to proceed with clinical decision systems, for example. It's extremely important for the future to anchor these kind of fields and the challenges we will face in the future in the education, in the studies, and the training. Furthermore, we will, and this is a big project we will face next year, establish a scientific exchange, which could be some kind of forum we had already here in form of the EvidenceCon. So it's important to us to bring the persons together that can talk about scientific topics, about guidelines, about standards, and push topics forward. Active commentary, of course, is also part of the whole process, especially in commenting on politics, legislation, technologies, etc., etc. What is very important for us is that we are not replacing other medical societies. And this is really important for us because, for example, we will never be the society telling you this is the best mental health app you can get on the market because we have experts for this, for example, the DGPPN. This is the profession. They should talk about what is best for mental health, not us. But there are overarching aspects. For example, how can digital health applications be evaluated, for example, or should there be, for example, some kind of special system we are doing the evaluation? And these are overarching aspects we want to address. So for us, it's more like, and this is on national and also international level, we want to bring the different players and stakeholders together, being some kind of brackets and melting pot here to bring these different stakeholders together to talk and to push the topics forward. We're doing this not alone. We are all voluntarily working in this project in the association, but we established a scientific advisory board to support and advise us as association. So from different perspectives as well, some of you know Professor Jorzik, especially from the medical law part, data security, data protection. Professor Tjalf Ziemsen is very, very active in the multiple sclerosis field, for example, having research about the digital twin model, which is quite exciting. Then some of you know we announced this today. We are very happy and very honored, thank you Ariel, that you're part of our scientific advisory board. She's well known, she's also part of the HIH. Also Professor Wereschild, who is very active in the HIV field and infectious diseases, as well as Professor Sabine Saloch, who is expert on the part of medical ethics. What we're doing is, and I just want to give you a short insight what the association right now is doing. So we participate in the continuing education and training. What we do is we have educational events, as I said, webinars. We hosted an event in August, for example, electronic patient record benefits and potential for science, which was quite interesting. We also had a very interesting discussion between the different professions here. So what we're doing is coming soon, an event will be, the date is not fixed yet, but will be in the end of January about digital health applications in general. Of course, we keep our members posted about the news in the field of digital medicine and also what we talk about the activities. We give some advice what kind of papers might be interesting for our members or which kind of events might be interesting, for example, this event or also DiGA Health Days next week. We post these kind of things and inform our members. What I'm very proud and we are very happy about this is that we are able now to promote young talents because this is very important for us. So right now this application process started this morning. We are granting scientific prizes for a master thesis, a doctoral dissertation, and a publication which is outstanding in the field of digital medicine, which means if you, for example, have a master thesis in the field of digital medicine, you can apply to get this award and this scientific prize. Furthermore, we have the opportunity, because of the sponsoring of the Deutsche Ärztefinanz, that we have the opportunity to give a medical doctorate candidate for the summer term and also the winter term a full-time scholarship, which means she or he can participate for 12 months totally full-time in his dissertation, and the life expenses are covered with 1,000 euros per month. So we are very happy that we can do this right now, and the call for application will be opened mid-November. Future plan is also travel scholarships. This is now more and more important as we travel more, see conferences, facing conferences, having presentations also throughout Germany and also maybe in the US or somewhere else. So this was just a quick insight. So we are doing all the work, but we are very happy if we find new members participating in the working groups, being involved in all the digital topics, working on guidelines, working on standards. So if you have a medical background, physician, nurse, psychotherapist, just text us. So we are happy about new ideas, new members that are helping us accomplishing our mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Filippo. So I have to be honest, I was talking to Jochen, who's sitting somewhere in the audience as well, about like founding something like this. I said, like, how is it that there's a DIME in the US, but we don't have something like this in Germany or even in Europe? And then just like 2 days later or something, I saw, okay, Filippo was faster than I was. So I'm super happy that you guys came up with this. But now let's come to the next point on our agenda, because we already lost a lot of time here with this Spahn interview. So now, sorry. Now we will have a panel discussion, and we have some other speakers here live on stage, also Sebastian, also from DGDM. Please come on the stage. And via Zoom, we also have 2 more colleagues from DIME. One is Smit Patel, who is the director of digital medicine there. He has a background in pharmaceutical, so I think he's a pharmacist, really, like a trained person for pharmaceuticals, and he has this background, and I think that's super valuable also when we're talking about evidence, because most of the things that we know about evidence we know from the pharmaceutical world at the moment. And on top of that, there was a very small change in plans here with Isabel joining us. I didn't even know that she was in DIME, but I met her 2 years ago at the Shift Medical. It's an augmented and a virtual reality conference in medicine, and she was the founder of a company that was working on neurological rehab via cross-reality devices. And so she knows like the position of all the founders out there, how to create evidence for these tools. So I hope, Isabel and Smit, I see you here on the small screen already. I think there you are as well. Okay, perfect. Then we can start with our panel. Thank you very much for being here. And I prepared some questions. And I hope you're ready to answer. No, I will be very nice today. So, but one thing that I first want to ask you, all of you actually, we are talking about evidence for digital and digital for evidence and stuff like this, and we are always assuming that there has to be something changed, right? And at the same time, we know that, although, of course, for the first drugs on the market, there were no RCTs and stuff like this, but we have, like, for decades, we have a system of so-called evidence-based medicine with, like, this pyramid, and we have the RCTs and stuff like this. And, okay, we already learned that there are new methods in evidence generation that are faster than the classical RCT. Filippo just pointed out that you have to calculate with 2 to 3 years. But what's the specific thing about digital? Like, why do we need something new? Why do we talk about new ways of evidence generation now that we're talking about digital? Why didn't we talk earlier about real-world evidence, or why didn't we come to conclusions there earlier? And why is it needed for digital? So whoever wants to start, maybe we start with Isabel. Isabel, we didn't talk for such a long time. I'm longing to hearing your voice. Please. Audio is not working yet.
So obviously, yeah, digital solutions or digital health solutions are incredibly valuable from a patient's perspective, in particular, to give patients options, right? To give patients more options that they currently have, to enable more access, also to relieve essentially the work that clinicians and healthcare professionals are doing on a daily basis under more stress than ever, under less resources than they have as well. So I think being able to offer additional tools to provide better care to patients and improve patient outcomes, and also relieve the work that clinicians are dealing with on a daily basis as well from a patient management perspective, I think is something incredibly valuable going forward. So, and it's something that is not only valuable, it's something that is necessary really to make healthcare sustainable for everyone and accessible for everyone as well down the line. So.
Okay, accessibility, I think, yeah, is a very important point. What about you, Sebastian or Filippo? Do you want to?
I think some of the points I pointed already out, that on one hand, the digital applications, for example, digital concepts or products, are changing a lot and are adaptable, which is a great strength and which is a challenge to classical and traditional study designs. On the other hand, you also have to face that in comparison to a drug, for example, a digital product is consisting of different components having different effects. And this is also something that is very challenging on the other side, because if you, for example, measure these kind of effects on different levels, for example, we have in the digital health application fast track process, for example, higher accessibility to the healthcare system, for example, which is a different effect from lowering blood pressure on the other hand. So we have different effects, different components that are measured at the same time. This is challenging for the traditional effects and for the traditional study designs we already use and have. And this is something we need to face. And yeah, we are evaluating more complex products than we have in the past.
Yeah, more complex. Some people from the pharmaceutical company might see that in a different way, but yeah, I totally think so. Maybe we just continue because we're really a bit short on time. Can I have my slide deck on here for a second, because I have I just painted something last night that I would want to show as a basis, not my slide. the one thing that we see now in Germany and also in the US with the FDA real-world evidence framework and others, exactly, that's it. So we have some regulatory changes now that these changes are stimulating something also in the evidence realm, and we have a lot of questions that we have to answer there. But at the same time, like we have this problem that we have like a pile of different actors that have to do something, right? I mean, we have the regulatory part there, like the ministry or whoever, the lawmaker. We have the companies that have to develop new technologies. We have science that has to develop new methods to assess these technologies. And we have the people out there, the patients and the healthcare professionals that have to use and want these technologies. And my question is now, like at the moment, we have this impetus from the regulatory side with the DiGA fast track, for example, with structural and procedural effects. But if we look at this, at these four stakeholders that would have to move, like what's the next step? Who's next in line? And maybe this a question to Smit, because I think you know much more than I do about the pharmaceutical companies. Like how do you bring companies now to adapt and maybe like nudge again regulatory a bit further and also stimulate sciences? Smit.
Great question, Jan. And if I have to portray something that we learned from DIME and working with multi-stakeholder initiatives, bringing in regulators, payers, investors, pharmaceutical industry, patients, health systems all together in a pre-competitive space, we learned that we need to move all together in terms of, as from the previous question we were discussing, that evidence is evidence, based on the tool that is being collecting, based on the physiological data, based on the digital footprint that from apps or digital therapeutic apps, we are observing those patient-reported data. Evidence is going to be same. How do we standardize the evidence and what stakeholder and the best practices are for those stakeholders, be it regulatory approval or be it payer coverage, or be it adoption and utilization by health systems, clinicians, and patients. What we need is to make sure that the rigor, the transparency, and the quality of the evidence is standardized. And if we can do that as the first step, we can move the field forward. And one of the other things I'll just point real quick is the fact that regulatory processes, policymakers, and government infrastructures are not the limiting factor for digital health innovation. Rather, an optimal regulatory strategy, when incorporated in the product development and early R&D stage, if it's a digital endpoint development from pharmaceutical industry, is something that we need to have a very clear understanding. And if we have that, we can move much faster altogether.
Question to Sebastian, because I understand that you're responsible for the industrial relationships of DGDM. What do you do to get industry involved? We already saw at Jen's presentation, this digital endpoint library, and on the left side you see like all the big names, right? I mean, like from pharmaceuticals and technology and all this. So what is DGDM's standpoint there when it comes to collaborating with the industry, getting them on board? Because we all know that nothing will be developed if there is not like also an industrial interest in it, right?
Yeah. Sure. I think what we saw the last years is that the industry was pioneer in digital medicine and also drives innovations. But I don't think that innovation should be an end in itself. It is also needed to have focus on the benefits for patient care, for the retention of health, and to focus on the support for the work processes of the workers in healthcare. And what we do is we speak to companies in the industry. Most of them came to us and asked, hey, you're doing cool stuff and we want to work with you. And we have those focuses and we say, okay, we want to work with you hand in hand, but we have to focus on these terms. And we think it's absolutely necessary to keep this focus, because in my experience, it's like when you have an innovation and the usefulness and effectiveness is not scientifically proven, it won't prevail on long term. So I think that industry and science have to work hand in hand, and I think that the industry already know this. And I think this is why we have really good conversation with industry partners, and I think this is why they want to work with us.
Okay, perfect. So industry people should call you, yeah, if they want to get involved.
Exactly.
Very nice. Okay, because we are really running out of time. Two more questions. One to Isabel, because you're a founder of a tech startup, digital health startup yourself. Like, what's like a very practical question? I'm founding a company. I'm developing a product, a digital tool. How do I start the whole thing? Like, do I go to a society like DGDM? Back then, when you founded your company, that wasn't an option. But like, do I turn to such a society? Do I find like some kind of an advisor, or do I just like read the right book, the playbook by Dime Society, for example? Like, I really recommend it. You can download it for free on the Dime website. It's like super helpful. But how do I start the whole journey when I want to create evidence for my tool?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a combination of everything that you mentioned, in the sense that obviously I started Immersive Rehab. It was the digital therapeutic startups a bit more than 5 years ago, where the field was still very small, in the sense of it was just kind of growing, but there were kind of some already small organizations that were setting up, trying to see what healthcare technology could do and bring for patients and engage with different stakeholders. But I think, and so all these relationships are very important, and were very important already for me as well. I think what is very key when starting a company in the space is you're working within healthcare. So it's really to understand, one, we are doing it for patients' improvement, patient outcomes, to improve patient outcomes, or to improve the workflow of clinicians. The other thing is, our solutions, when we're working with patients, are they regulated solutions? Because once you're dealing with a regulated product, it means that your way of approaching product development, implementation, rolling out, working with clinicians, working with patients, is just very different than when you would just roll out a management system, for example, that is not regulated. And that will have a huge impact on just working with patients and identifying who your core stakeholders are, etc. as well. Prior to developing any technology, really, in a way, because I always say the technology development is the easy part of creating a solution. It's really the implementation, integration, the regulatory aspects, and then reimbursement aspects, who is going to pay for what. To think about that already from the very start, day one, or prior to day one, when you're starting a company, really, and that will taking a very collaborative approach, and that will result in much more successes down the line for your company, but also just for everyone within the healthcare system as a whole.
Okay, thank you for that piece of advice, Isabel. So now we are really running out of time, but one last question. I have like 20 more questions on here. I did a lot of preparation. One last question to you, Filippo, as a medical doctor. Because we talked about the patients now, and we talked about other stakeholders, regulatory, industry, how do I convince the doctors in the end? Like, you're a medical doctor yourself, how do I convince them that there should be something moving, and what kind of evidence do I need to convince them?
So the question about what kind of evidence is, of course, depending on the situation, what kind of product you have, so there's no general answer for that. But I think that's why we founded the DGDM in the end. There is a common ground with all medical professions, and this is the scientific and medical basis that we're working on, and this is something we are also obligated to. And so my advice is to take science seriously at this point, to look for also maybe hypes that are with no scientific basis on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's extremely important that we have an evidence basis for our solutions. And I think also if you listen to the doctors, I think this will be the most crucial point in the end to convince colleagues, nurses, psychotherapists, for example, to prescribe DiGAs or taking part and being part of the digitalization in general.
Okay, thank you very much. So you already see that in this quite small panel, we have all the knowledge that you need to be successful with your evidence generation. Thank you very much, Isabel and Smit, for joining us here on Zoom. I hope you're staying tuned because we will have some more interesting talks now. We will turn to our next talk. Thank you very much. To our next talk, which is held by Wiebke Löbker of BfArm, and she will talk about the requirements of the DiGA fast track with a specific focus on evidence generation. Wiebke, I don't have to introduce her anymore because she was talking yesterday already, and she's set for all of our events. She also, I still owe her a Health Innovation Hub hoodie.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, all these associate members of the Health Innovation Hub. So, Wiebke, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jan. So after we talked about the DiGA framework yesterday in detail, the focus today will really be on the evidence of the DiGA we saw so far within the last year. So as you know, there are two possibilities for DiGA to be listed in the directory. It can be a preliminary listing if not all data are really 100% sufficiently available yet. So if only, for example, the requirements regarding data protection, data safety, security, functionality are available, and interoperability, for example, and the data regarding the positive care effect, for example, just to show some kind of hint that there's really a benefit for the patient. Interoperability, for example, is really an important requirement for DiGA so that they really can work in the best way in the growing e-health infrastructure, so that in the future they really can work together with the electronic health record, for example, and not only with hardware it's connected to. I don't want to go into detail about the fast track journey so far, but I just want to highlight that before the Digital Healthcare Act came into force, there was not really much transparency about the real benefits of digital health application for the patients. We know that they are safe and that they work, that they have some kind of effect, but we really do not have an overview of the benefit for the patient in the daily healthcare, and that there was a lack of transparency. Patients, of course, using or who want to use these digital tools, or medical doctors who want to prescribe it, ask for more transparency and clarity about the real benefit of these products. And once the Digital Healthcare Act came into force, the framework is laid down in the law, and more details are described in the DiGA ordinance. And as you maybe had heard yesterday, we also published a DiGA fast track guide summarizing and explaining all the requirements that are described in the Digital Healthcare Act and in the ordinance. And this document is really thought as a guide for manufacturers to understand what the requirements are and to make it transparent and really help to interpret the law and the ordinance so that, you have some guides what you need to do to show that the DiGA fulfills all the requirements. And as my colleague Wolfgang said yesterday, it is a living document, and the next update will be published within the next days. Just a short summary about what we are talking about when we talk about the DiGA. So it's a lower risk class medicinal product that is already CE marked. It is supporting the recognition, monitoring, treatment or alleviation of diseases or disabilities, for example. The main function is based on the digital technology, so it can be accompanied by medical doctors or code a therapist, for example, but the main function needs to be the digital technology. And what is also important is that it is in the hand of the patients, so it is not only used by the healthcare provider, but also or mainly by the patient itself. And the requirements are, as I already mentioned shortly, safety and performance aspects, data protection, information security, and interoperability. But the main focus here is on positive healthcare effects. And a positive healthcare effect can be the classical medical benefit. So, for example, the improvement of a disease or the shortening of the duration of a disease, the extension of survival, for example, or the improvement in quality of life. And what is new for the DiGA is that a positive healthcare effect can also be, in addition or alternatively, be a patient-relevant improvement of structure and processes in healthcare. So, for example, a DiGA supporting the coordination of treatment procedures or ensuring the alignment of treatment with guidelines and standards, adherence, patient safety, health literacy, and, for example, also being able to handle the illness-related difficulties in the daily care. And what are the requirements for showing that there is a positive healthcare effect? What does the DiGA ordinance says? First of all, a comparative study is needed showing that the DiGA is better than not using it. And not using it means that it can be compared to the normal standard of care in the situation, or maybe not yet, but in the future it can be compared against another DiGA that is already permanently listed in the DiGA directory. And what also is important is that the comparator must be in line with the current or the up-to-date care situation in Germany. That does not necessarily mean that a study needs to be conducted in Germany, but it needs to have similar background care, for example, than it is the situation in Germany. And if studies from other countries are used to show the positive care effect, the transferability of these data to the German context needs to be demonstrated. The studies must be registered in a public study register, and the results of these data must be published no later than a year after the end of the study. And also important is that the study reports needs to be compliant with the standard framework for reporting of clinical trials or studies. And this is, as you can see later, one of the hurdles so far. But I think one of the most important facts is that the methodological approach chosen must be appropriate to show that there's a positive healthcare effect. So I was asked frequently yesterday if it's really necessary to submit an RCT. No, it's not really necessary, but if the RCT is the best way to show that there's a medical benefit, for example, then an RCT is the best way to prove the positive healthcare effect. So, and once the application for the improvement is successful or was successful, then the DiGA is listed in the DiGA directory. And you can find a lot of information there on the DiGA itself. So not only on the indication, but also on the evidence shown for the positive healthcare effect. By Friday, 100 applications for listing a DiGA in the directory have been submitted to the BfArm. 21 assessments are currently ongoing, and from the closed procedures, currently 6 DiGAs are permanently listed, and 18 DiGAs are preliminarily listed in the directory. The BfArm rejected 5 applications, and 49 applications were withdrawn by the applicants. When looking to all DiGA applications, we see by now a wide range of different approaches, but in the beginning we mainly saw DiGA that are addressing cognitive behavioral therapeutic approaches, for example, to treat mental disorders. But in the meantime, there are a lot of DiGA, for example, accompanying cancer care treatment or helping patients to better take care of their pain, for example. And a lot of other approaches, for example, sharing knowledge transfer or helping documentation and monitoring of disease symptoms. With regard to the evidence shown for all of the 100 applications, we see that the majority are really based on RCTs. We see some applications with one RCT, we see other applications with more than one RCT or combination of RCT with retrospective studies and also meta-analysis. And there are also round about 20 applications with other forms of evidence, for example, surveys or intra-individual comparisons or retrospective comparative studies and studies from registers. I already mentioned that 5 DiGA or applications were rejected and around about 50 were withdrawn. And what are the reasons? They are mainly based on insufficient evidence, for example, for the final listing. So we saw a lot of applications who directly ask for the permanent listing, but we saw that the study protocol, for example, or the pre-specification of endpoint analysis were not available, or that the study design shows some significant limitations or does not show confirmatory evidence. With regard to the provisional listing, we saw that the systematic data evaluation was insufficient because, for example, the observed time frame was too short. We do not ask for the entire observational study duration, for example, for a permanent listing, but just to show some data or for a week, for example, that might not be sufficient for a chronic disease. And also that the evaluation was not performed with the DiGA that is subject to the application, but was, for example, a prototype. And other reasons for rejection or withdrawal of these applications was that the number of subjects analyzed in the data analysis for the provisional listing was insufficient. So, for example, 5 people is not really a good number to show that there's really a positive care effect. So from the DiGAs listed so far in the directory, we see that 23 show a medical benefit, and only 1 DiGA is there without a medical benefit and just with patient-relevant improvement of structure and processes in healthcare. On the other hand, we see other DiGAs who show both, so a positive care effect in form of a medical benefit and in addition with a patient-relevant improvement of structure and processes in healthcare. And with regard to the evidence of the DiGA listed in the directory, it's maybe a little bit irritating that 22 DiGAs show RCTs, but that does not mean that the preliminary listing, for example, is only based on an RCT. So, for example, there's 1 DiGA that is listed due to an interim analysis of an RCT, but there are also other DiGA listed based on retrospective trial designs, for example. So we see a wide variety of study designs also for the preliminary and also for some permanent listing in the DiGA directory, with pre-post study designs with around about 30 to 400 patients showing really robust and clinical relevant effects. But on the other hand, we also see randomized control trials yeah, as I said, from results from pilot trials or interim analysis of ongoing trials that will be submitted later on for the permanent listing. With regard to the patient-relevant improvement of structure and processes claimed, the majority is adherence and health literacy so far. We see also the same range of evidence, so it's not only based on RCT, but it is also based on other study designs. And we have one example, as I mentioned, with PSVV only, so without a medical benefit, and it's based on an interim analysis from an RCT. So to summarize our experience with the evidence presented so far, what is going well? We see that the study designs are controlled as required. We usually see a high level of evidence, and corrections to the study plans can usually be implemented in the application process. So for example, if we receive an application for a preliminary listing and there are some lacks or there's something not really perfect to show the positive care effect later on, then it's the best time to say, yes, it might be helpful in the future, but please consider also this and this aspect. So the consultation in advance of submitting an application is really helpful for all sides to generate the best evidence. And where are the main hurdles and bottlenecks so far? The pre-specification for ongoing trials is sometimes insufficient, or the study documentation is inadequate or incomplete and not according to the standards. With regard to the systemic data evaluation that is needed for the preliminary listing, I mentioned the reasons for rejection or withdrawal of the application before. So, for example, the number of patients observed is too low. And we often see that people are asking for permanent listing, but we say the data for permanent listing are not really sufficient at the moment, but we consider it sufficient for a preliminary listing. And then it might be the case that people withdraw their application and can submit a new application for a preliminary listing first, and to become time to generate the evidence needed. So it is really helpful for all sides to get in contact as early as possible. So we made an analysis of all the DiGA listed so far and all the applications we received so far, and we could show that 80% of those who ask for an advice procedure in advance are successful with their applications, and only 20% who did not come to consultation in advance. And the interest in the consultation procedures is stable, and we are getting in contact with a lot of manufacturers and people who are interested in submitting an application. So it's around about the numbers we had last year. And what we see is that the number of general questions regarding the procedure, that they are decreasing, and this, I think, is a good result of the DiGA guide, for example, and shows that it is really helpful for the people. So the most important take-home messages, I think, are that there is a well-balanced level of evidence we see in the applications. One of the criticism in advance from different stakeholders was that the level of evidence required for listing a DiGA in the directory is too low, and others said it is too high. But what we see is it's possible. With all level of evidence, it must be appropriate to show that there is a benefit corresponding to the disease and to the need of the patients in this situation. And the other important take-home message is get in contact with us before submitting an application. So then it's time to make the corrections necessary to submit a successful application. Yes, so I can only offer you to contact us if there are any further questions on the DiGA Fast Track, on the requirements, deadlines and fees, etc. And beside the DiGA guide, we also have up-to-date information on our website. We have a blog post that is new with tips and tricks for DiGA applicants. And of course, we are offering kickoff meetings and advice meetings by the Innovation Office.
Thank you very much, Wiebke. Very nice overview. We will skip the Q&A because of time today. So we actually planned a Q&A, but we are so much lagging behind. Yeah, thank you very much. The number that I find a bit sad is that there's only one DiGA that applied with the structural and procedural effect, like only structural and procedural effect, which shows how hard it is also to prove these effects in a way that you can apply to BfArm with it. So, but now let's come to a case that of like a real DiGA study. Today I have invited Stefka Lysk of Newsenselab, and Newsenselab is the manufacturer of the DiGA M-Sense, which was listed, I think, 6th or 7th. I think it was like among the first 10 DiGA listed in the directory. And it's a preliminary listing. The study is still underway. And the study is quite interesting because it is a digital study for a digital tool. So it nicely bridges these two parts of our EvidenceCon today. So Stefka, please join me on the stage. Stefka is responsible for clinical development at Newsenselab, and she is supervising the study and developed it together with Claudia Witt, Professor Claudia Witt from University of Zurich, who is joining us on Zoom. She's up there already. And she has many heads on her head that she's wearing, but she's also involved in the EMMA study of mHealth. So please, the stage is yours, Claudia and Stefka.
Yeah, first of all, hello, and on behalf of our whole team, we would like to thank the Health Innovation App for inviting us here today to get the chance to introduce you and talk about our innovative EMMA trial. Yeah, first of all, we would like to introduce ourselves quite quickly. Yeah, who is us? I'm Stefka, Head of Clinical Development and Operations at Newsenselab. And who is Newsenselab? Newsenselab is a German DDX company that was founded 2016 here in Berlin as a spin-off of the Humboldt University. It was founded, amongst others, by Dr. Markus Dahlem, experienced migraine research. So Newsenselab has its roots in research, and since the foundation of the company, love for science is one of our leading values. Hello, Claudia.
Hi, Stefka. Hi, everybody. I'm Claudia Witt. I'm here representing the academic partner, and I do this together with Daniel Pach, who is part of our team, and we are working at the University of Zurich and at the Charité Medical School. And for the last 10 years, we have done randomized controlled trials on digital therapeutics. And for us, it's really important. We usually don't do contracted research. So we are real research partners who want to develop something together with the manufacturers.
So first of all, we'd like to start to give you an overview about the manufacturers' and researchers' perspective on digital clinical trials. So why did we as Newsenselab have the vision to pioneer the digital clinical trial market in the German DiGA market? So what is our experience? We brought 2016 M-Sense on the market. M-Sense is a migraine application which was listed, as said before, as the 7th DiGA in last year. And M-Sense Migraine was developed by an interdisciplinary team of physicians, psychologists, designers, and developers. And MSense is a comprehensive, personalized intervention against migraine. So since 2016, we've experienced with real-world data analysis and also traditional clinical trials and, of course, scientific publications. So throughout the last 5 years, we developed our, let's say, 2 core technical assets, which somehow paved the way to start with the digital clinical trial. First, it's what we call Newsenselab Discovery. Newsenselab Discovery is our solid in-house analytics and data platform, so our database. And also what we call Newsenselab the dialogue system. It's an agile development framework for the application. So it's a low-code approach which makes it really easy for researchers and physicians to adapt the application depending on the study requirements. So last year when we planned our DiGA trial, we, from the beginning on, had the vision to do it pure virtual. And why? First of all, we have the technical core assets in-house, and we had the approach that we wanted a cost and time-effective trial design. And another aspect that's not talked about too often is that we see definitely a chance in digital trials to overcome limitations of recruiting when it comes to diverse, minoritized, or homebound patient population. So now I hand over to Claudia's perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Stefka. So from our research perspective side, our group was always interested in aspects which really allow to empower patients, which improve self-care, but also in modernizing clinical trials. And when I mean modernizing, it's really easy active data collection here, but also the scalability. And I come very much from the area of comparative effectiveness research. Also all the work which is done by Pecori in the United States has inspired me for a long time, so that we really want to include here real world data, but still high level evidence. And so far we have run several RCTs before we met with Newsenselab. The data is published, also has been visible in the media. And we are also doing virtual trials, which we even run over the App Store in different countries like Brazil, Taiwan, and also Australia. And then we were lucky to meet you guys at Newsenselab, and we were totally thrilled that a lot of our ideas really fit nicely together. So we were thinking about our research approach. And then I usually start planning a trial. I start planning a trial that best answers the research question we have. And then later I try to fit it to the requirements, because I have the feeling when you go for the requirements first, the legal framework, you might miss something which is important for the trial because you already think in a tunnel. So what were our key elements? We wanted to do it as virtual as possible. We want to show real world effectiveness, but still confirmatory testing. So no discussion for me, this has to be a randomized trial. And still I like to reduce missing data and bias in the trial as much as possible when in the spectrum of efficacy and effectiveness. The holy cow of these trials is a randomization, so why it needs central randomization, and also to have a really good allocation concealment. And then we come to the point that kills a lot of trials. Those of you who have done clinical research, you know that I think it's nearly half of the clinical trials that don't recruit the sample they have calculated they need to show a difference between their groups. So we really had to plan here well, because you have heard, you have to be fast in these trials. A year is pretty short. We needed a large sample, over 350 patients. And you have to understand that all the recruitment information, everything you send over social media has to be seen by ethics before. And you can't go forward and backward with ethics the whole time. This would be too time consuming. So you have to pre-plan this well, that you have enough material which you can use later. So from my perspective as a research methodologist, these digital therapeutics are in the framework of non-pharmacological studies. So I would use here the outcomes for non-pharmacological studies, but then when we matched it later with all the requirements and the frameworks, there was a request by the BfArm that we go for the framework of drug trials here for migraine. As a researcher, I don't agree with this, but I have to fulfill the requirements, so we had to fit to it, and this also works okay for us. So let's go for the trial design now. So what you see here, and the focus of the today's talk is really about the virtual flow and not the specifics of a migraine trial. What you see here is what a patient is doing. They download the app. They fulfill some eligibility criteria. They give a first informed consent here, and then they enter a kind of baseline phase. This is very typical for migraine as a diagnosis. It is a standard for migraine trials, makes it more difficult. But then we had also to include here that the physician is doing the diagnosis. Also, there was already an algorithm in the app. So we have to, in a way, switch to another digital system, that there are video consultations possible. Stefka will explain all these aspects. And then afterwards, when everything was fulfilled, we had a randomization which happened within the app. And again, then still patients stayed in the app. They were randomized to either the full-size AppSense app or a kind of control study app. So why do we have a control study app? Because to reduce bias, how we assess our outcomes, we want to have the same documentation in both study arms. But we have to be very careful that we take out everything from the app, which is the effective part of the app. And this is not easy with migraine, where you have a diary, which is an outcome in our trial, but it's also an active element. So we had to work here that we don't give feedback from the diary, and also that patients can't look it up so far retrospectively. And let's have a look for the outcomes. So we have our primary outcome and also some secondary outcomes here within the diary, but we have also questionnaires. And this is one example here, the headache impact test. This is a validated questionnaire, which is well known in the framework of migraine trials, but you have to get a license for it. And you have to check if this questionnaire is really validated for a smartphone screen. And you have to go through a whole validation process with the company providing the license. This was Qualimetrics in this case. And why do I mention this here? If you have to be so fast as you have to do in these DiGA trials, you have really to pre-plan this, because this costs extra time here. And then I hand over to you, Stefka, for the patient journey.
Thanks, Claudia. Now I'd like to show you some screenshots of our virtual patient journey. As said before, we really wanted to make it as seamless for the patient as possible. So the patients downloaded the application in the Google Play Store or App Store. They got all the information they needed regarding the trial procedures in the study information. It was a sort of a dialogue with our chatbot avatar. And they could, if they were still interested, go on with a screening. And if they were eligible and were still interested, they could straight away in the application fill in and sign the informed consent. And they could afterwards start at the same day with a baseline. So it took patients about 20 to 30 minutes to start with a clinical trial. And you see here at the right side a screenshot of the home screen of our baseline version. It's basically a data input tool where patients can document headache attacks and medication intake, as well as schedule the virtual physician visit. So this guides me to my next slide, our virtual trial center. So how did we organize this? So the patients, as said before, could schedule the appointment very flexible via the AppSense app. And we, for the trial, for the call, we used a GDPR compliant and licensed provider for the call. And our physicians had two monitors mostly. One was the patient, and the other one was our web interface. It's a web interface which we programmed just for the EMA trial, but which could, in the future, also be a blueprint for other virtual digital trials. So what happens with this web interface? Because this is really important. Our physicians were guided. They logged in with the study ID of the patients to the web interface, and they were guided through the whole call in this web interface. So what you see here, maybe it's a bit too small, but they were guided through the step-by-step through the call. They could see what their next question, let's say, would be. They had to inform the patients once more, they had to verify the diagnosis, and they had to check the eligibility criteria. And what's really interesting about this is once the physician ticks the appropriate box, this information is sent by an encrypted channel automatically to our backend system. And our backend processed all the information it had for this specific patient. And for example, if the patient was included, was eligible for the trial, then our backend had the randomization list and randomized the patients straight away. And this information was then processed by the app on the patient's mobile phone, and the patient could straight away see if he or she was eligible and in which randomization group he or she was. So there was no human involvement in randomization at all. So another thing we'd like to talk about today is our recruitment. What did we plan, what did we do, and how did it work out at the end? So we planned multiple ads and different methods of trial recruitment, online and offline strategies. But at the end, we had to change our strategies because we ended up that almost 80% of our trial recruitment period was in a Corona lockdown here in Germany. So we switched our strategy to, let's say, 90% social media ads. So we had ads on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. You can see some examples here. And what we also did, we built a quite comprehensive and well-designed and informative website. And I think this is really crucial for digital trials. So patients or participants that were interested could see all the information they wanted on the website. There was a huge FAQ section that they would click on the ad. So you see this example here on the left side, on their mobile phone, on Facebook, for example, and then they were guided to the website. And it's the same with the posters. We distributed some posters at practices and pharmacies, and via a QR code, interested participants could also inform themselves, then were guided to the website. So how did our trial recruiting go in the Corona lockdown? So at the end, we recruited 1,660 participants in 5 months in the baseline. This is huge, I would say, especially since this was in a pandemic. And we've heard before, normally it takes 2 to 3 years to conduct a randomized clinical trial, especially because randomization sometimes takes ages. And we recruited this year, March till July. And what you see here, hopefully you can see the colors. It's the red line are the weekly new participants in the baseline, and the blue line are our social media impressions. So for those that are not so familiar with the term impressions, it basically means that our ad or one of our ads is shown in a social media feed. And I'd like to explain a bit 4 events here that we found very interesting, and we'd like to share some, I think, interesting knowledge we gathered through this. So first is we started with an A/B testing for the recruitment. So we held multiple slogans, which were all approved by the ethics committee before, and we tested them on social media with a narrow targeting and a small campaign, and we could definitely see which works better. And the second event we didn't plan in advance. It was what you see here. We had to stop our social media campaign because we ran in staff problems in our virtual trial center. In April, the vaccination campaign here in Germany started. So physicians who were planning working for us in the virtual trial center, for example, in their own practice or in the evening, they said, sorry, we can't do this anymore. We're so busy with getting all these vaccinations organized. So we ran into staff resource problems. But it took us 2 to 3 weeks to solve this, because we could, and this is also very interesting when you think about decentralized trials, we could recruit our physicians all over Germany and also abroad. So it took us 2 to 3 weeks, and when we started off again. We started with a really wide campaign, and what we observed is that not such a high increase in new baseline participants. So we thought, okay, but we really don't want to prolong this. We want to stop at the end of July as planned. We've planned 5 months in advance. So we have to think about another strategy. And we thought, let's try out some narrow targeting campaign and some influencer campaign. So we asked influencers in Germany with migraine or migraine-specific influencers without paying them to spread the news of the EMMA trial. And at least what we observed in these 2 or 3 days was an incredible peak in our baseline participants. So I think this is it was at least very big learning for us, and I think quite interesting information to share.
Yeah, and I'm allowed to show the numbers here. And I have to say, this is for researchers, this is a heaven. To have such large numbers in a short recruitment time. You can see here nearly 2,000 patients were interested in the app. And from them, 85% started in the baseline. So they gave their first informed consent. Then we have the next big step to take. They had to make actively an appointment with a physician to get the diagnosis confirmed, all virtual, but they had to do it. And this were then 40% of those who started the baseline. But from those, most of them really were eligible, and 90% of those that were seen by a physician really were randomized and are part of the trial and will be analyzed in the trial. So let's talk a little bit about virtual trial during the pandemic. I'm also a clinician, so I know the shortage of clinicians well. I think this is our main negative aspect we had during this time. But besides this, I think this trial was really nicely prepared for it because we could recruit patients as well as physicians German-wide, and also making an appointment online instead of having to call someone. You know, in the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people were in home office and their normal phones were not forwarded. This started later than that we all were set up much better. But even this did not matter for us because it was an appointment you could directly do online. And I think from this trial, we have really some nice take-home messages. And I think as a team, we can say, stay virtual if you evaluate digital therapeutics, because it's a very good fit here, and see that it fits good to the requirements which are there. And develop really a broad range of recruitment texts. It's a little bit like when you think about KA and NLP there, this bag of words you have to create. You vary them a lot and you have long lists, but then you have something you can use when you really want to adapt it for social media. And you also have to leave some flexibility in the recruitment. So when you do what in social media, because sometimes you might have issues with some of your processes during the trial, and you might have to scale down a little bit the recruitment, or you have to scale it up. And I think, Stefka, our main take-home message for everyone here is that teaming up between manufacturers and researchers is a really good thing, because our trial is better, not only in the virtual way, but also everything else we have done in the study design, and it's more meaningful for the patients who use the app later. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share our expertise, but also our experiences we have made here. It's a new path for all of us, and I think most of us are still in a learning curve here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Stefka, stay with me for just a second.
Okay.
I just realized we have a little bit of time. We are quite well in time now. So now I have some questions. That was like a super interesting talk, I think, and I hope that it will serve as a blueprint for other manufacturers. Stay digital is a very nice take-home message. One question that I had is, so you had like a control app as well, right? It was like like a placebo app that you developed there, or I mean, it had the diary function, but it didn't have like the active function, as far as I understood it. Can you tell us a little bit more about like why you did it and how you did it, specifically how you designed that?
Yeah, this is a crucial point, especially when it comes to headache or pain, like migraine in our example, diseases, because like migraine patients are really used to document their headaches in a diary. So, and what we know from research that almost sometimes 15 or 20% of the effect of an intervention just comes from the headache diary. So we were really thinking about for very, very long, how should we design this baseline application? Can we do a shame app? No, we can't, and we didn't want to, but we somehow built a data input tool. I would say it's a data input tool that didn't play back any information, at least not as much more as needed, to the patient. So the patient could fill in their, or could document their attacks, their medication, but they couldn't look at, couldn't see the whole diary. So they could only see the last 7 days, which is really innovative, I think. And so they didn't see all of the diary. And so, but what we thought, maybe we run into problems with dropout rates when it comes to just using a data input tool. But I mean, the data is, of course, there, it's stored. So we said to the patient, okay, if you are in the baseline and you end up in the control group, which is basically the same application, then after 4 months, you get all your information, you get all the information about your attacks. So then once they are in the intervention group, after 3 months, I mean, the control group gets the intervention as well. So then they see all their attacks and they get attack reports and analysis about their attacks and medication intakes. So that hopefully works. We haven't analyzed the data yet, but that hopefully will work well as motivation to use such a data input tool.
Okay, interesting. So, but the randomization was done within the app, and then you didn't blind the trial, right? The patients knew that they were getting...
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, because this washout and change wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is a fun fact is one wrote us, okay, now I'm in the trial and everything started, and then she asked a question, and we were like, oh, but you aren't. So there are basically patients that thought, okay, this data input tool obviously is MSense and is the intervention, and then they get this blown up effect once they see the whole application, which is really funny.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's very nice. That's a nice feedback on the go, so to say. Thank you very much, Stefka. Thank you very much, Claudia, for telling us about the EMMA study.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So now it's my pleasure to announce that we are going to have a coffee break now. I need it as much as you need it. But before I want to release you to the buffet downstairs or the coffee downstairs, just a few words on the next session. Because now we finished the part evidence for digital. The next part will be digital for evidence, and we will start with Christine Manta, which is very interesting because she's like developing a tool, or she's working for a company that has like a tool for very innovative, I would say agile trial designs, which makes like RCTs feasible in a digital way, just as we saw it here, and in a much larger scale as well. And we will talk about the patient-reported outcomes. So please stay tuned. And that's also for all the around about 500 viewers on our stream. Stay tuned, take the laptop to the kitchen or the toilet or wherever you're going, so that you don't miss the next part of our EvidenceCon. So see you in half an hour, 4:45, back here in the room. Thank you.